It all started when I inherited an antique mirror from my late aunt Devyani. She lived in a sprawling ancestral house in the heart of Rajasthan, a place steeped in history and local folklore. My aunt was always considered a bit eccentric, often warning us about objects that remember. I never took her seriously. I mean, who would? But after what happened, I'll never dismiss her words again. The mirror arrived at my apartment wrapped in layers of cloth, with a handwritten note from my cousin. A piece of family history for you. The frame was intricately carved, depicting curling vines and strange, almost human-like faces. It had a dull sheen, as though the glass hadn't reflected light properly in years. It was beautiful but unsettling that I decided to hang it in my bedroom. That was my first mistake. The first night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the distinct feeling of being watched. My room was silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. Groggily, I glanced toward the mirror. The reflection was faint in the dim moonlight, but something felt off. I brushed it off as paranoia and went back to sleep, but the next few nights were worse. I began noticing subtle changes in the reflection. Items on my dresser appeared slightly moved, though when I checked, they were untouched. Once, I saw what I thought was a smudge on the glass, like a handprint pressed against the inside of the mirror. When I wiped it, the smudge was gone, but the unease lingered. Things escalated a week later. I was brushing my teeth, glancing at the mirror occasionally. Suddenly, I saw movement, a shadow darting across the room in the reflection. My heart sank. Turning quickly, I found nothing behind me. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection stood frozen, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I screamed and stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, I convinced myself it was stress. My work as a software engineer had been demanding, and sleep deprivation could play tricks on the mind. I decided to ignore it, but the mirror had other plans. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was standing in a dimly lit hallway, the walls lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a version of myself, but none of them moved in sync with me. Some stared blankly, others smirked menacingly. One whispered, "You should leave." I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight with fear. Why now? I knew the mirror wasn't just an antique. There was something deeply wrong with it. I called my mother to ask about its history. Her voice grew tense. "That mirror. It belonged to your great-grandmother, Sumitra. She claimed it was a wedding gift, but she always kept it covered. After she passed, your aunt insisted on keeping it." "Why? What happened?" When I told her about my experiences, she fell silent before saying, "Devyani used to say the mirror showed you things you weren't supposed to see." Determined to get answers, I started researching mirrors in folklore and stumbled upon a local legend. Some believed mirrors could trap spirits or serve as portals to other realms. One story in particular stood out. It spoke of a cursed mirror that watched its owner, growing stronger with each glance until it could show them their worst fears, or their fate. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror wanted something from me. When nights later I decided to test it. I sat in front of the mirror with a lit diya and stared into the glass. At first it was just me, tired, scared, and desperate. But then the reflection began to ripple, like water disturbed by a pebble. My face twisted into a grotesque grin that didn't match my expression. Behind me, shadows began to gather, forming the outline of a figure. It was tall, gaunt, and faceless. The figure leaned closer to my reflection, and I swear I felt breath on my neck. My reflection mouthed words I couldn't hear, but I understood them. "Let me in." I froze, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The figure raised its hand, pressing it against the glass. Its fingers were impossibly long, skeletal, and as they touched the surface, the mirror began to crack, the fractures spreading like spiderwebs. Panicking, I grabbed the diya and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting sound, and the room plunged into darkness. I felt a suffocating presence lift, as though something had been expelled, but the air still felt heavy, oppressive. The next morning, I took the broken pieces to a local temple and explained everything to the priest. He listened intently, his expression grave. "That mirror was a vessel," he said. "Whatever was bound to it is now free. but it's weakened. We must act quickly." He performed a cleansing ritual and advised me to bury the shards far from my home. I followed his instructions to the letter, traveling miles into the desert to ensure the pieces would never be found. Since then, life has returned to normal. But I can't look at mirrors the same way. Sometimes when I pass by one, I catch myself glancing too long, afraid I might see a shadow that doesn't belong or a reflection that isn't quite mine. They say mirrors never lie. But after this I'm not so sure.